Good morning. How are you all doing today? We good back there? All right. Today we are continuing the series on removing the masks, and today we are removing the mask of complacency. Removing the mask of complacency. Thank you, Isaac, for reading Revelation 6:10 for us earlier. As a reminder of what was there, what was going on there. Appreciate that. Complacency is, it's comfortable, right? It's comfortable. It does what things it's where everything feels like it's supposed to be. When everything is going just right, or it feels and seems just right, then complacency. Yeah? We get complacent. But when I say that word complacent, you don't have a positive feeling about it, do you? No. Being complacent doesn't have about it a positive connotation or a positive feeling. It's something like, oh, it's kind of an unsettling word, which is odd because it describes being comfortable. But when we look at this and we see this here and what's happening, a complacent mindset, this level of complacency, this kind of unsettled comfort, is it's a very difficult trap to escape once we have entered into it. And we'll look here, Revelation 6:10 again. This is from the New American Standard Bible. It says, "And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, 'How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?'" Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 through 11, we see the fifth seal being opened, and this is the response of the blood of the martyrs, those who had been slain for the will of the gospel. They cry out with a loud voice, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" It's a cry of, God, are you complacent? Are you okay with what's happening to us? Are you okay with what has happened, what's going on? Are you okay with what's wrong in the world? And because this is an opening of the seal, and the seals in Revelation are dealing with the realm of the church, they're also asking, are you okay with what's going wrong in the church? God's answer in verse 11 is to an effect, no, I'm not okay with it, but just wait. I am dealing with this in my time. And sometimes when we look at this and we see what's going on around us, we have this mask of complacency. We're comfortable where we are. And we end up like this fairly famous comic now, I think, goes around the web every week or so, describing some new situation of everything going on around the world is crumbling down. The house is on fire, but we're sitting there at the table with our coffee. This is fine. I have this thing. This is what I have, what I need. This is fine. This is the picture of complacency. this is fine. When things are going wrong around us and we think, it's not that bad. This is okay. It's complacency. When things are happening that, maybe we don't like, but we just ignore it. Or we just push it down. We're putting on that mask of complacency. This particular comic, and you can probably, for those of you who are joining us online, if you want to see what it is that we're looking at here, you can just go online, search for the "This is fine" meme. Do an image search for "This is fine," and you'll see exactly what we're talking about here. So that's what I did to find the picture to put in the slide. When we see this, we look at this idea, this image is called the mask of fine. That it's just this thing that we do, that everything's going around, but we focus on just one little thing so that we can pretend that we're okay. We ignore the stuff that's going wrong, and we put on the mask of complacency. We find this is where I'm comfortable. This is what I'm comfortable doing. So this is what I'm going to focus on, even though the house is burning down around me. In Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 12, we see what it is that God tells the people of Israel what will happen. What will happen for those who are just complacent? Those who were in Israel who were doing wrong, they were doing evil, they were being unjust. The prophets were coming to them and saying, this is not fine, but they're all sitting there, and Israel is basically burning down around them. Their relationship with God is burning down around them, and they're sitting there with their coffee. This is fine. What they're quoting is, they're saying here, it will come about at that time, God is saying, that I will search Jerusalem with lamps, and I will punish the men who are stagnant in spirit, who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good or evil. When we're saying this, when we look at this, we say this, that the Lord will not do good or evil. This is saying the Lord's not going to do anything about anything that we have going on here. He's not going to come in. He's not going to give us the consequences of our actions. Those leaders of Israel, those who were leading people astray, who were doing evil in the sight of the Lord, had gotten complacent in God's mercy and grace. Got complacent in God's mercy and grace. Because you go back, you read the book of Deuteronomy. Read the book of Deuteronomy. It is full of covenant curses. Warnings, what Moses is telling the people, like, hey, when you go off and do this, and he's not saying it as some sort of I know you're going to, this is determined that you will. He's saying, I know you're going to because I've dealt with you for the last 40 years. I know what you're like. I know how fickle you are and how quickly you are willing to turn against the God who has saved you, who delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians, who crossed you or brought you across the Red Sea on dry land and then had that same sea swallow up the Egyptian army chasing you, who gave you food and water in the desert, who gave you warmth and light in the night and cool and cloud cover in the day. He says, I know how quickly you are to turn against that if one little thing just seems to go wrong. So he's saying, when you do that, here are the things that will end up happening. And the final and ultimate punishment for the people of Israel when they would turn their backs against God was that they would be taken out of the land that God had promised to them and had given them. We see it happen to the northern kingdom of Israel around 723 BC, maybe 721, something like that, where the Assyrians came in, conquered, brought people in from other areas and took tribes out, broke tribes up, and sent them all across the Assyrian Empire so that they could not rise again. There would be no kind of genealogical drive, no surviving of this attempted genocide, and a remnant of the people of Israel would band together and make themselves strong, rise up and overthrow their oppressors. The Assyrians knew what people would do, what tribal groups would do, and so they fought in a way that would, and they ruled in a way that would overturn that ability. They spread like people groups far across the empire and forced them to intermix with others. For the kingdom of Judah, it happened in the exile to Babylon. They lost the land that God had given them because they had been going away from God for so long. There are times where we think, perhaps individually, that God's not going to do anything to me. I've got the relationship. I know who He is. I read my Bible. I go to church. I read my Sabbath school lesson study. God's not going to do anything to me. It'll be fine if I continue in this sin. It's fine if I continue turning a blind eye to injustice. It's fine if I ignore all the things that God has called me to do, but I have a relationship with Him, and His grace and His mercy are completely endless. There will never be any consequences. He isn't blessing me right now, so I have no reason to think that He would come in and do harm in any way. It's a dangerous mentality. Sometimes we think that as not just an individual, but as a church. That everything seems to be going fine as a church. That as we do things and we go, we have about, maybe we just keep seeing that the church is able to stay open. We're still able to do things, to reach out and have a life as a church. And so everything must be fine. But there's places that maybe we aren't seeing where others are being lost in the fire burning the house down around us. We have to remove the mask of complacency. I've lived in my house for a little over 2 years now. We walked through, and it was in March of 2019, late March of 2019. We walked through. We viewed the house. We looked with a pretty critical eye, I thought. We put an offer in on the house. We've lived in it for 2 years now. Our offer was accepted, bought all that. There are things that I am seeing in my house now that should have been obvious to me when we were walking through it in the first place. Issues that have crept up that have changed the way that we can live in our house right now, because when it was put together, they didn't do everything exactly right. They didn't build the house in a way to deal with, hey, we get a lot of rain and the foundation and the house are going to settle and they're going to sit in a different way than they did when we first built the house. They didn't build it with a concept of future-proofing. They didn't build it for what was to come. They built it, this is how it is right now, and this is how it will always be. And if there's any problems, if it isn't this way, it's someone else's problem down the line. I had to remove a lot of the grout in the tile of my master shower because where they changed the plane, they just used basic sanded grout. You may be wondering, well, why is that a problem? Well, one of the walls of the shower is on an exterior wall of the house, and as that exterior wall of the house has settled, the shower was pulling away. The wall was pulling away, and cracks were developing in the grout along those changes of plane. And I saw them. I was like, I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. I'll deal with that later. Until I got to a point I had to deal with it because water was leaking out of the shower onto the subfloor, under the wall between the shower and my closet, and had soaked the carpet in my closet with water, and mold was growing in there. Because I was complacent about dealing with that. Because I didn't just deal with it right when I saw it. I didn't deal with the issue right when it came up. I let it fester. I just let it go. I let it do its thing. Thought, nothing serious will come from that. I still have a bare cement floor in my closet. Still trying to figure out what flooring we're going to put in there so then I can get that in and then finally fully move back into my closet. As it is, my clothes are spread out between 3 different closets throughout the house so that I don't have to move them all right when we're finally going to get that work done. When we see an issue, when it comes up, we need to see that, recognize it, and deal with it. Because we don't know how long that issue has been there before we noticed it. We have something as humans called inattentional blindness. That when we're not paying attention to what is going on directly in front of us, if we're not paying attention to what's going on around us, things can change and we don't realize it. There have been different TV shows that have done Candid Camera used to do this kind of thing. I forget, there was another show more recently that would do this, but they would bring someone out and they would be talking with someone, and then there would be a visual barrier would walk by, a couple of people carrying a big sheet of plywood or whatever, and while that plywood was obscuring the vision of the targeted person with someone, they would swap someone in who was wearing similar clothing, and the people would not notice the difference at all. They would not notice that they were now talking to someone else after the plywood went by. These are complete strangers, not someone they're familiar with. There was in Australia on a morning news TV show, there was a male and female host. The male host of the show decided for 1 year that all of his public appearances, he would wear the same suit, the same shirt, the same tie, the same shoes. Everything exactly the same, except when certain things dictated he be more dressed up. When he was going to a black tie event, he wore black tie. But otherwise, every public appearance was the exact same thing. his female co-host, if she wore the same thing twice, she was getting flamed for it. She was getting chastised for it, and this, that, and the other thing. And after a year of doing this, he revealed, I've been wearing the exact same suit. And he had pictures and screen captures from every broadcast and showed them same suit, same suit, same suit, everything that he was wearing that same day for an entire year. Images that had been taken of him at public appearances wearing the same thing every year. And no one said a word to me. Their focus was here. But if wearing different clothing is something that you actually value, why weren't you calling me out on it? Because it doesn't really matter. If a man is wearing a suit, he's wearing a suit. And unless it's something radically different from the accepted norm of suit, no one's going to notice what suit he's wearing. Complacency is part of this inattentional blindness where we're just only looking at the things that we decide to care about. And it's an attitude that leads us into destruction. We continue on here. We look here, Luke chapter 12, verse 19. This is a parable of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man, he's been working all of his life and building up wealth and storehouses for his wealth. And he says, and I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. The very next thing that happens in this parable is that the man dies suddenly. And all of the wealth that he built up goes to others. He got complacent. He focused on what he thought was important and wasn't looking at what others found important, wasn't looking at what God found important. We build something up. We see, look, the task is done. And then we like to just sit and be with that. Like, I've finished the project. We're good to go. Don't have anything else to do. Now we can relax. Now we can be done. And this kind of mentality here in Luke 12:19, I don't understand it, and I don't know a single person who's lived this way, because every single person who has recently retired, when they've recently retired, has end up telling me within their first 2 years of retirement, I don't know how I ever had time to have a full-time job. Because their time in their life is filled with so many things. All the things I think that they wanted to do while they were working full-time, but working was taking the time from those things. I have a good friend of mine who was at seminary with me. He's an entrepreneur. He said one of the greatest weaknesses and causes of complacency among those who have an entrepreneurial mindset is a consistent paycheck. That sometimes we hinder ourselves going for the thing that is consistent rather than the thing that's going to be good. We don't take a risk. We don't invest in ourselves or grow to learn more because what I have right now is good enough. What I have right now is consistent. It's providing for what I need. And if I step out in faith and try and do something more, I might fail, and then I won't have this consistent thing to fall back on. And we can treat that in our spiritual lives sometimes, where we look and we're like, Oh, I want to try and do this thing, but I need to be at church. I want to try and do this thing, but there's these programs that we have to do in this way, and there's these things that we're doing in order to do this or that. There's times where maybe going out on Sabbath, instead of coming into a building, we could go out and go and minister to people and show them what life with Jesus is like, but we're so focused on we have to come here. I'm not saying we shut down the church and we go out and just go out every Sabbath and do that, but sometimes it would be helpful. Sometimes it would be a good thing to do and a good use of God's time to minister on His behalf. If in any way, as in our spiritual life, we get to a point where we say to ourselves, I'm good. I've been with God for so long. I've got all this spiritual knowledge and this relationship knowledge of who God is and this love of God and His love for me and grace and mercy. I'm going to take my ease, eat, drink, and be merry. We should be happy with where we are when we are in relationship with God, but we should never be content with how close we are to God. We should be happy with where we are in our relationship with God, but we should never be content with how close we are to Him. We should find that joy and happiness having that connection, but should always be striving for a closer, deeper, better relationship with the God who has saved us, the God who loves us, the God who wants to transform us into who we were meant to be. But we cannot do that until we remove the mask of complacency. Hosea 9:17, God is speaking of Ephraim. It says, my God will cast them away because they have not listened to him. They will not be, and they will be wanderers among the nations. The tribe of Ephraim had gone so far and had decided no longer will they listen to the calling of God. No longer will they listen to his prophets. No longer will they serve him. And says God will cast them away because they have not listened. They will be wanderers among the nations. Ephraim, one of the lost tribes of Israel. This right here is also part of why in Revelation chapter 7, when we see the listing of the 12 tribes of Israel, Ephraim is not one of them. Because they had gone away. They were no longer considered God's people. They got complacent in what God was wanting to do in that with them and calling them to, and they just decided they were good where they were. We see this same kind of thing in the New Testament. Acts chapter 13, verse 26. We see Paul and Barnabas, they're preaching and saying, brethren, sons of Abraham's family. They're preaching this in the synagogue. They are in a synagogue preaching this, brethren, sons of Abraham's family, and those among you who fear God, to us the message of this salvation has been sent. And they go on to tell about the gospel of Jesus Christ. They go on to talk about what it is that has been done. And many of them accept that message. Many of them receive that message with joy. They were not content with how close they were to God. They wanted more of Him. But for those who were comfortable, For those who had grown complacent with how things were, what their religion was, and how their spirituality was, those who did not want to progress to the point that God was calling them to, we see in Acts 13:45, but when the Jews saw the crowds, they were filled with jealousy and began contradicting the things spoken by Paul and were blaspheming. They were saying that what Paul was saying was not true, and they were calling acts of the Holy Spirit, acts of God, acts of the devil instead. They were saying that they were evil things that were going on, that they were lies, all of this happening because they were jealous, because their complacency had been challenged, and they didn't want to move. But notice here also in verse 26 again, where it says, brethren, sons of Abraham's family. Notice how Paul talks to them, sons of Abraham's family. That's a pretty good family to be part of, right? Biblically speaking, to be part of Abraham's family was a blessing. It was a benefit. It gave advantage in knowing who God was. But we look at this, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5. It says he predestined us to adoption as sons through Jesus Christ to himself according to the kind intention of his will. This is speaking of our God and Father. He destined us to adoption as sons, adoption as children, to become part of not the family of Abraham's family, not sons and descendants of Abraham's family, but children of God himself. Through adoption, which family would you rather be a part of? Abraham's family or God's family? But let me ask you a question. If you are a part of Abraham's family and you are enjoying all of the benefit, all of the privilege, all of the advantage of being in Abraham's family, and now you are invited into God's family, and this is now going to take priority over Abraham's family. And you've built your identity in being part of Abraham's family. And now you have to, start from scratch? You have to reshift your identity. Instead of being a descendant of Abraham, now I am a follower of Jesus Christ. The complacent mind won't make the shift, but the one that is happy in their relationship with God, but not content with how close they are, will always make the shift to grow closer to God, to follow Jesus Christ more nearly, to see him more clearly and love him more dearly. But we won't do that if we are wearing a mask of complacency. The mask of complacency hides the bad things that are going on around us, even the things that we may be doing ourselves that are hindering our growth as an individual, as a church, at any level. There's a saying that I've learned in church leadership ministry classes, in other leadership classes that I would take while I was working retail between going to Walla Walla and heading to seminary, going anywhere else. There's one common saying that seems to be everywhere when growth is something that's wanted to do, when you want to be able to get things done better, to do better. There's one common saying, and that is, the way we've always done it is no excuse. But if the way that we have always done it is hindering people from growing closer to God, if the way that we have done it is hindering your spiritual walk, tell me. Because I don't want to hinder your spiritual walk. If the way that we've always done it is hindering the growth of the church, then we need to not be hindering the growth of the church. We cannot be complacent with just the way we've always done it. If we have reason for the values that we hold, for the things that we do, good. Let's hold to that then. But if we only do things because this is the way we've always done it, or this is what the tradition tells us to do, tradition is peer pressure from people who are dead. Traditions, it's peer pressure from people who aren't even our peers anymore. They're dead, they're gone. They have no influence left and will not be affected by any change to any tradition that we have. If tradition is the only reason that we do it, perhaps we need to analyze that and find out what is the real reason that we do that. Or is there a meaning that we do it this way because we value doing it this way? To remove that mask of complacency and not just be, well, this is the way we do it and this is fine. But to instead look at this is the way we do it, and we do it this way because it glorifies God. This is the way we do it, and we do it this way because it brings people into relationship with Jesus Christ. This is what we do. This is the way we do it because it builds up the church in spiritual life. These are reasons to do what we have always done, but if our reasoning to do what we've always done is just because we've always done it that way, it's time to take off the mask. To remove the mentality of complacency. It's hard to do. So as I said at the beginning of the sermon, complacency it comes from a place of comfort, and we don't want to make ourselves uncomfortable, do we? When you sit down somewhere and sit down into your chair and you get it and you sit in just the right spot and everything's perfect. You don't want to move. You don't want to shift your weight this way or that way because you might make yourself uncomfortable in doing so. But if you sit in the wrong part of the chair, you're very quick to move because you're uncomfortable and now you're making yourself comfortable. And that's why removing the mask of complacency is so difficult to do, because it takes us out of our comfort zone and it forces us to take ourselves out of the comfort zone. It forces us to go and do things we may not want to do. Things that can be painful. When I was at camp meeting, our youth department speaker, the first night, Tuesday night, showed up in a suit and tie. I was there in about what I'm in today. Dress pants, button-down shirt, dress shoes. And as he saw what I was wearing and the other pastor who was working with us was wearing, he removed the tie before he spoke that night. And he said, tomorrow night, and told us, tomorrow night, I promise I won't be so overdressed. But he explained it to me. He wanted to match the vibe that we all had with things and didn't want to feel like he was overdone with things. And honestly, he didn't like wearing suits, but he said, and this is a direct quote from him, I've been traumatized into wearing a suit. That everywhere that he feels like he has to dress up in this way that is not authentically him, because he's been traumatized. And when we don't deal with that trauma, we are putting on that mask complacency. For the rest of the week, he matched our vibe pretty well, or what we were dressing. He matched along with what things were doing, with how we were doing things. Not because he felt compelled, but because he realized he could be himself. And he said he'd been traumatized because so many places he had gone. In studying as a pastor, he goes to preach somewhere and, no, we can't let you in the pulpit. You're not wearing a suit and tie. He was the guest speaker. There wasn't anyone else scheduled to preach. No one else was there planning to preach. And he was told at one place, you can't go into the pulpit. You're not wearing a suit and tie. So he borrowed a misfitting coat, threw a tie on, so that the people would let him preach. He was traumatized, but he's dealing with that trauma. It's removing the mask of complacency. That kind of thing is detrimental and hindering to us. When we put barriers up on people for them being able to come to God because, I'm fine with it, so I'm fine with that for myself, so it's fine for everyone else too. But they may not be there. When we don't remove the mask of complacency, we're not, A, dealing with our own ways that we've been traumatized, and B, possibly traumatizing others. God wants us to be in his family. He wants us to have that close relationship. And we should be happy when joined together with God, but not content with how close we are, till we can perhaps be depicted as John was, Leonardo da Vinci's painting The Last Supper. As there they are, the disciples and Jesus reclined around the table, and John is leaning himself on Jesus' chest. So close with his friend, with his teacher. May we strive always for that. Remove the mask that stops us from seeing where we really are with God. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so much that you call to us. We thank you that you have made way for us to be in relationship with you. Father, help us to deal with our burdens. Help us to remove the mask of complacency. We know that you want to care for us. We know that you want to take care and love us, to help us grow. Help us to lay these things at your feet and always grow closer to you. We ask these things always in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, and only by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.